Frank Abagnale is one of America's most famous imposters of all time. He was depicted by Leonardo DiCaprio in the 2002 film Catch Me If You Can, and his real-life story is just as insane as the movie Portrayed. His most notable cons include impersonating an airline pilot and a medical doctor. He was able to steal over $2.5 million from hundreds of victims, but he's ended his life of crime and now works for the FBI. Who is Frank Abagnale? This is True Crimecast.
This is True Crimecast. I'm Jamie with John, as always, to talk about crime. I'm excited today because we have another non-murder episode.
But don't get disappointed, because it is going to be very, very fascinating, and it's based on a movie that I saw in 2002. Jamie, are you familiar with the movie Catch Me If You Can?
I am. Actually, the movie was based on what really happened.
That's what I meant to say. I've not had enough coffee today.
Versa.
But it's really, really cool. I didn't know back then that this was based on a real person, so I'm really excited to talk about the case today.
Yeah.
Any housekeeping before we get started?
We recently recorded and thanked Patreon members. If you've recently joined Patreon and we're not thanking you right now, that's because we're recording this really early, which is exciting for us. So we'll catch you next time.
Yep. Thank you guys so much for joining Patreon. We just finished up our phone calls a couple weeks ago, and that was awesome to get to talk to a lot of you all. So be looking out. If we hit 200 Patreon members, we are going to travel to meet with one of you all, do some dinner, hang out, and just have fun as a way to say thank you. So be one of the lucky Patreon members who will get a visit from us in person.
Yeah, so get your mom and them to sign up, and we'll get on that. Sorry, that was a little too country.
That was a little country, but we did speak to somebody, and then later we spoke to their mom. So it is a family affair over on Patreon.
It really is. All right, John, enough of that. Let's get into some crime. Get us rolling.
All right. Frank Abagnale was best known for a 2002 film called Catch Me If You Can. And this is where Leonardo DiCaprio portrayed Abagnale as a scheming, brilliant conman. Jamie, saying Leonardo's name was quite possibly the hardest thing I've done today and will do all day today.
Kyle gave us the pronunciation of Abagnale in, spelled out. Didn't know DiCaprio was that much of a problem.
Well, so DiCaprio, I have a running joke that I always call him Leonardo DiCaprio, and that accidentally came out in recording. Jamie had to edit me about 17 times, so fun fact. Anyway, so in this movie, this guy is just a Hollywood, like you think that this movie is just a Hollywood depiction of Abagnale's life and famous career as an imposter, but this is actually pretty real life. Like what he actually did is pretty similar to what is portrayed in the movie, but you kind of just assume like Hollywood came in and just made this whatever they wanted. Well, he, in his life, kind of portrayed himself as different kinds of professionals, and we're going to get into a lot of those in just a little bit. But he ended up being on the run for most of his career from the FBI. And so we're going to get into this story now. This is the story of one of the most infamous cons in American history, in which the common man was able to impersonate an airline pilot, a medical doctor, and just all kinds of low-level deceptions. And we're going to talk about Frank Abagnale now.
Frank Abagnale Jr. was born and raised in New York State, and he was born on April 27th of 1948. He was one of four children born to his father, obviously also named Frank, and his mother, Paulette. His parents separated when Frank Jr. was 12, finalizing their divorce 4 years later. He spent most of his time living with his dad, who was relatively well off. They lived in New Rochelle, New York. As a child, Frank Jr. idolized his dad and looked at him as kind of the main role model for his life. But in his early teen years, he started experimenting with shoplifting small items from local stores. When he was 15, he graduated from this petty shoplifting to his first con scheme, in which his father ultimately was the victim. What happened here was Frank Sr. gave his son a gas station credit card so that Frank Jr. could buy fuel for his truck as he traveled to and from his part-time job. Frank Jr. had an upcoming date, and he devised a scheme to get money for it. He used his dad's credit card to purchase expensive car items, such as a battery, And then he would return the products to the gas station asking for cash instead of a refund on the card. So in the end, he ended up using his dad's gas card and racking up about $3,500 worth of merchandise. Now, this was in 1963. If you move that to today's dollars, that's closer to $30,000 of what amounts to credit card debt for his dad. How would you feel if your kid racked up $30,000 of debt and you didn't find out until the end of it?
Well, I mean, I would be furious. There has been times where I'm like accidentally logged on to my Amazon account and my kids have like accidentally bought stuff. I don't know if it's on accident or on purpose, but they might be growing up to be little Frank Abagnales.
This was the first in a long line of financial fraud schemes that really got him rich. Another of his early tricks was to write personal checks on bank accounts that he knew to be overdrawn, defrauding the bank. The bank would quickly grow wise to the scheme and demanded that he pay the balances of his cold checks. So what he would do was he would get other checks from other people and deposit those to pay off his debt. So it was kind of a mixture of check fraud and a Ponzi scheme to pay himself back, except he was stealing the money instead of taking investments. So once the bank started tracking him and got to know him as a thief, really, he started impersonating other people. He would travel around the region of New York State where he lived, opening new accounts at different banks, and he continued his cold check scheme. Eventually, he needed new identities after he exhausted all the banks in his area. Around this time, Abagnale became even more daring and started to print off his own fake paychecks. So he made completely fabricated, fraudulent paychecks that nobody could detect that they were fake. He would deposit these at the banks and immediately withdraw the cash balance before the bank realized that it was a fake check. By the time he was caught, John, he had written over $2.5 million